Chapter 23 of Welcomes, Part 2. Rarity had almost forgotten what it meant to relax. She had only been in Frieseland for about a week, but every day in that week had been hectic, filled with meetings and conversations, all burdened by the weight of passing lives. Every hour not spent acting was interspersed with constant, thundering reminders of the cost of inaction, and at times, she had driven herself beyond exhaustion. She did it all without hesitation, for that was the least she could do. And now there was none of that. She was lying on a cot with a small notebook open between her forelegs, staring blankly down at a matching page. A pen hovered in her magic, as still as her mind, softening the shadows of the curtained space between cargo crates that served as a room. When Pontius had approached her asking for advice on how to appear more familiar to the Frieselanders, she had been able to compose and construct a wardrobe for him within the day. It had been so long since she had practiced her craft, she'd been full of ideas. The creativity had sprayed out of her like dye thrown against the wall, and she had struggled to keep it focused on the one solution she had eventually chosen to implement. It had been fun to create again. But once the job was done, there were more important, more pressing tasks clamoring for her attention once more. Now she had nothing but time, and that energy refused to flow. She flipped back through her journal with a pensive frown, looking at the half-sketched designs abandoned on that day, and couldn't picture their finished forms. What was wrong with her? She wanted to create. Lying down to doodle new ideas during a quiet moment had always been a relief for her during hectic days at her boutique, but after an hour of trying, all she had was a blank page. Her ears twitched at the sound of clattering wheels and cheery humming, and she looked up to see Pinkie nose her way in through the curtain separating her room from the rest of the ship. A tray of bread, smelling of cinnamon, was balanced on her back.
Hi, Rarity.
Pinkie smiled and flapped a hoof in an exaggerated wave.
Want some zucchini bread?
Rarity cocked her head.
There's an oven on this ship?
Pinkie's eyes widened, and she leaned back, making a show of checking around in both directions before pulling the curtain closed behind her and rolling closer. She leaned down low, beckoning Rarity in with a hoof, and Rarity obligingly offered up her ear.
Don't tell the captain,
she whispered,
but I built a campfire in the balloon.
Rarity frowned.
What? You know, like an oven, but on a campfire.
Pinkie grinned, bobbing her head side to side.
So you want some or not? Well, it does smell just divine, but surely some of the crew would ask questions?
Rarity pouted, looking up and adding quietly,
Is that even safe? Oh, pshaw!
Pinkie waved the thought away with a hoof as she grabbed the plate off her tray, dropped it on Rarity's notebook, and followed it up with a thick slice of toasty bread a half-second later.
Not if they want more baked goods. I suppose you're right.
Rarity shrugged, breaking a small piece of bread off and popping it into her mouth. Zucchini, cinnamon, walnut, and love. The corner of her lip curled up into a small smile.
This is very good, darling. Very good? That's it?
Pinkie narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Her hoof flashed out, resting against Rarity's forehead, and she let loose with a horrified gasp.
Oh no! Rarity! Something's happened to your inspiration! Only a temporary drought, I'm sure.
Rarity plucked another piece off the plate, munching on it with a wistful hum.
Where did you even find zucchini? Rarity! This is important! You are an boring you?
With a small grunt and an impressive display of dexterity for a pony capable of only using half her limbs, Pinkie shifted her weight and rolled onto her back, the bread tray bouncing once before settling onto her belly. She peered up at Rarity with narrowed eyes, her voice losing some of its playfulness.
Is it because of Pontius?
Rarity's eyes bulged as her attempt to swallow her mouthful turned into a gasp, followed by a choke as the bread lodged in her throat. A pink hoof jutted out and smacked her solidly in the chest, forcing the wad of half-chewed zucchini bread out of her muzzle and soaring through the air. Pinkie's head darted out like a viper's, catching the flying morsel with a snap of her teeth. She licked her lips as she looked up at Rarity patiently. It happened so fast that it took Rarity a few seconds of stillness to catch her breath and just comprehend it all. Finally, she gathered her thoughts. She cleared her throat with a dainty cough.
Pontius?
Pinkie nodded, bumping the top of her head against the ground.
Mm-hmm. Are you feeling bad about setting him up with River Pie?
Rarity blinked. She stalled for a time with a flat laugh, while Pinkie looked up at her with that same expectant stare.
You're straightforward as always, darling. And perceptive.
But then Pinkie was always startlingly observant. As silly as she might act in the midst of one of her parties, the mayor was a ceaseless collector of information, processing every detail with frightening intuition. Of course she had noticed what Rarity did. And of course, Rarity decided with a sigh, there was no point in trying to hide it. And maybe talking things through with a friend was what she needed anyways.
I don't know if I'd say I felt bad about it exactly,
she began.
He's an upstanding young stallion, and really he only wants to do right by his father and his ponies. And me, I suppose.
She looked away, biting her lip.
Well, maybe I am feeling some small amount of remorse regarding the issue.
Pinkie didn't say anything, just listening with wide, attentive eyes. She glanced toward Rarity's abandoned bread, and the unicorn took another piece off and chewed on for a moment.
He deserves better, you know. He deserves a real relationship with a pony who loves him for who he is and not just some mare his father forced into his bedroom. A mare who might be a little bitter about the whole situation and maybe doesn't treat him fairly, considering how uninvolved he was in it all, and isn't even from his world, really. He should have someone his age. I mean, I'm certainly no crone.
She paused to cringe at the thought.
But goodness, I feel more like his mother than anything else. And that's not really appropriate, is it? Am I boring you? Nope. Oh, that's good. He'll be happier this way, I think. A mare from his culture who admires him for what he is.
Rarity nodded, reassuring herself of the decision.
Every pony wins. Well, as long as you're sure he'd like it,
Pinkie said. She tilted her head and nibbled at the corner of Rarity's plate. Rarity's brow furrowed as she met her friend's eyes.
Well, of course he would, dear. Why wouldn't he? She's young, attractive, motivated, and far more interested than I'll ever be. But she's not you. What?
Rarity pursed her lips as she struggled to keep the bitterness out of her voice.
I didn't ask for him to fawn after me like some crushing school cult. If it were up to me, I'd ask Twilight to cast a spell and let the whole thing go to ashes, and I'd never talk to him or his wretched father again.
She knew she had failed to keep her poise. Oh, but it felt so good to let loose. So why stop now? She deserved it.
And what do I care what he thinks of it? I'd rather he be smitten with her and finds his own way out of my life, but so what if he's not? So what if he finds out what I told her? Let him get angry. Maybe then he'll finally run to his father and end this dumb charade.
She was breathing hard, she realized. Her lips curled back into a spiteful snarl. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, adjusting her mane with a hoof as she added in a more reserved voice.
Apologies, darling. That was not behavior appropriate for a lady.
Pinkie giggled.
That's okay, Rarity. I understand.
She let out a little grunt and there was a clatter of wheels. And when Rarity opened her eyes, Pinkie was standing upright once more with the bread tray balanced on her back. The other mare gave her a bright smile.
I'm sure Pontius would understand, too. He's a good pony. Do you want another slice?
Rarity looked down to her plate, now all but empty.
I suppose one more couldn't hurt. Okie dokie, Lucky.
A fresh slice of zucchini bread plumped down onto the plate.
It's sweet of you to be concerned about him, you know. That's how I know your heart's in the right place. Boop.
Pinkie's hoof flashed out, bumping softly against Rarity's nose.
See you around, Rare Bear.
With one last laugh and a squeal of her wheels, Pinkie skidded out through the curtain. The sound of her humming faded away, melting into the creaking of the ship and the buzz of the engine. Rarity spent several seconds looking after her, going over the conversation in her head. Was it concern for Pontius that had been haunting her after all? Frieseland had been a powerful distraction to keep her mind off the predicament of her marriage, even with his attempts to follow after her everywhere she went. With the city behind her, her mind was left to wander. And somehow, the thing that was bothering her the most, more than the idea of a life wasted away in an empty marriage, was the thought that her actions might break the young stallion's heart. She sighed, looking back down at the blank page of her journal. She picked up her pen and her magic and chewed absently on the tip.
It's better for him in the long run.
Finally, a wisp of inspiration graced her. Perhaps some kind of skirt for Pinkie to wear, something to turn her practically designed wheels into an expressive fashion statement.
Yes.
A small smile came over her as she pictured it in her head.
That would be lovely, wouldn't it?
She set her pen against the paper and began to draw. Rainbow had been ready for anything when she stepped off the ship. She had faced monsters before, even some that didn't introduce themselves with a smile. She had experienced the agonizing helplessness of being trapped in a little submarine while other ponies fought for her life. She had witnessed the sunken gravestone of everything she had ever held dear, and she'd struggled with the very real potential that she may have to take out one of her closest friends as a merciful necessity. She had been naive and foolish when she first woke up in the future, and now she was beginning to feel like she understood how the new world worked. The new world respected strength, it rewarded conviction, and it punished weakness. When she heard the Argo pulling away, leaving her and her companions to fend for themselves atop a mysterious construct that had no discernible reason for existing, she had expected monsters. She had been prepared to put her training to use to defend her friends from mutated beasts and help Twilight uncover the mystery of what had happened to her world. But the only thing that stepped out of the tower had done it with a smile, lined with teeth that ended in fine points, and invited them in for dinner. The radio popped in Rainbow's ears, carrying Trails' voice.
I've been to a lot of weird places since signing up with you, Saber, but this one might just be the weirdest.
She heard it twice, over the radio, and a second time muffled by her armor from Trails' speakers, projected for Twilight to hear.
Did they just invite us to supper?
Applejack asked.
That's, mighty hospitable of them.
We're not moving until that scan is complete,
Saber said.
Do you know anything about this, Twilight? I'm as lost as you are.
Twilight's voice was difficult to hear past the wind and the bulk of Rainbow's armor.
But there's a large amount of meat and other spoils, which, combined with the sharp teeth... Cannibals!
Trails blurted.
I've read about this kind of stuff. They live out in abandoned corners of the world and lure in unsuspecting ponies by inviting them to dinner, and then serving them the corpses of past victims.
Rainbow blinked. All eyes turned to Trails, who returned the looks innocently.
What? You heard it too? Nothing can grow out here in this cold,
Twilight said, shaking her head.
These ponies seem to have been living alone here for a long time, and they might have no choice but to hunt for survival. That doesn't make them monsters. Twilight, they're predators,
Trails insisted.
I'm a predator.
There was a pause in the conversation. Twilight's rebuttal had come out in a low growl that made the hairs on Rainbow's back stiffen. A far cry from the hesitant, ashamed way she'd spoken about her turn to carnivorism back in Canterlot. Now it almost sounded like she was offended at the implications of what Trails had said. Perhaps even like she was proud of what she was.
We'll go in,
Saber said firmly.
Keep a tight formation.
She led the way, and Rainbow fell in on her right, forming a circle with the rest of the group. Her every sense was on high alert as they crossed the crystal walkway approaching the looming maw of the great arched doors set into the wall. They too were made of crystal, and had been left slightly ajar, leaking a warm orange glow. Saber pushed the door open wider, glanced back to beckon at her team, and stepped inside. Rainbow was quick after her, rushing to brandish her wing blades in case of an ambush, only to stumble in awe as she crossed the threshold. It felt like stepping into another world. Her gaze was immediately drawn to a thick column of complicated crystal piping in the center of the cavernous circular room, radiating twinkling rays of light that reflected off the walls, bounced up into the vaulted ceiling, and scattered, giving the illusion of a shimmering rainbow sky. Small huts were erected all around the edges of the chamber, made from thick-haired hide draped over supports of banded bone, each one with its own crackling brazier to outline the silhouettes of curious ponies watching from within, and many more were built into the wall high off the floor, accessible only by ladder, or rope, or narrow walkway. And it was warm. Rainbow thought back to the searing cold that had gripped her when she plunged under the ice, to the frigid wind that lingered inside the Argo even with every hatch sealed. That chill had no place here. Here, the air was warm, heated by fire, glowing crystal, and the bodies of uncounted ponies. Most of those ponies watched from within their tents. Rainbow saw old mares watching crystal pots, young stallions looking up from racks of stretched hide, and the wide eyes of foals looking over upturned skulls filled with soup. Some were seated around a low table that circled the center of the room, almost hugging the glowing crystal centerpiece. They all turned curiously, their conversations quieting. And with the start, Rainbow realized every one of them was looking at Twilight.
I don't like this.
Sea Saber's voice was quiet in Rainbow's ear. She was speaking softly, ensuring she'd be heard only over the radio.
too many unknowns.
I'm telling you, Saber, these ponies are gonna eat us!
Trails hissed.
Y'all are jumping to conclusions faster than Rainbow and Cider season.
Applejack said.
These ponies ain't done nothing.
Is there a problem? The elderly stallion that had invited them inside offered a reassuring smile. If you have any questions...
What is this place?
Saber asked. He blinked. A second passed and his brow furrowed with confusion. You... do not know us? Saber stomped a hoof.
Answer the question!
I'm sorry. It was rude of me to answer a question with a question. The stallion shook his head slowly. My name is Serene Agate, and you stand in the warm hall of the South Face.
And where are you taking us?
Serene's smile faltered, but only for a moment. To the Spire, to be welcomed by our regents. I'm sure they'll be eager to discuss your gifts or arrange warm beds if you're tired.
No.
Saber stepped back, shaking her head.
We're not following you anywhere. If you have leaders that need to speak to us, they can speak to us here.
Serene grimaced. The strange ponies watching from around the room whispered amongst themselves. After several long seconds, he tried again. I feel there's some misunderstanding. May I have your name?
I've said all I need to,
Saber said.
Your leaders can speak to me here, or we will not speak at all. Saber, come on,
Applejack said.
He's being mighty polite. I've seen polite ponies kill before.
Saber shot back.
It will take more than a smile to gain my trust.
Saber nodded, but didn't say anything. A part of her felt bad for the old stallion, but she trusted Saber's judgment. As warm and comforting as she found the gentle heat and the shimmering colors, the excess of sharpened teeth, bone, and hide only filled her with unease. There was no telling how many ponies might be living in this mysterious construct, or what they might do once they felt they had the advantage. Twilight cleared her throat.
Argo.
Serene's relief was obvious. He took a tentative step towards her, and she smiled, revealing her fangs as she extended a hoof to shake.
My name's Twilight Sparkle. I've been looking for you.
Welcome, Twilight Sparkle. It is an honor to have one of the Shapers chosen among us. Serene bowed, kissing her hoof, seemingly oblivious to the small eep of surprise that escaped her. Please come with me, unless your companions protest.
I'll go too.
Rainbow trotted up to Twilight's side without hesitation. Letting Twilight follow this pony alone, splitting ways so soon after being reunited was enough to make her stomach churn.
I appreciate it, Rainbow, but you should stay here with the others.
Twilight turned to face Rainbow fully, a sincere smile on her lips, and leaned in to whisper.
Saber's right. These ponies could be dangerous, but I feel like this is where I need to be. Try not to worry, okay?
Her smile grew wider as she glanced to the side, to something Rainbow couldn't see.
We can take care of ourselves.
Rainbow blinked, taken aback by the strange choice of pronoun. Was Twilight talking about the dark magic that had been possessing her? She wanted to say something, but Twilight was already following Serene across the room, ignoring the many eyes that followed her. Rainbow was just about to run after her when an armored hoof wrapped around her shoulder.
Leave her be, Artie,
Applejack said. Rainbow stiffened.
We just got her back, AJ. And I reckon we'll get her back again. She'll be fine.
Rainbow sighed.
You're right.
She shook her head. allowing herself to be guided back to the rest of the team. She had worked so hard to be strong enough to protect her friends, and now that she was ready, it seemed like they didn't even need her.
All these ponies.
Twilight's mind raced as she followed Serene Agate across the room, skin crawling at the sensation of dozens of eyes following her.
You said they're all like us? Not completely.
Midnight walked beside her, frowning down at the Watchers.
They are lesser. They sharpen their teeth in imitation of what they cannot achieve. Serene called me a chosen of the Shaper.
Twilight watched the old stallion attentively as he led her up a smooth ramp that curved up at the far side of the room. She looked back, looking over the room from on high and marveling at the way that the ponies themselves seemed to sparkle with light.
What do you think that means? You.
Midnight's voice was stern and demanding, and Serene's ears twitched in response.
Who is the Shaper? Midnight? What? If you truly cared, you could have stopped me.
The Savior. Serene paused at the top of the ramp, turning to an arched double door engraved with an image of a pony looking up at a hard-edged heart. The Master of Crystal, who raised us from the dark and protects us from its advance. He glanced back at her as he pulled his coat tighter. You are blessed by the Savior's magic. I did not know it was possible for an equestrian to know that touch. Snow drifted inside as he opened the door, and Twilight followed him out onto a wide balcony. It was impossible to see far past the thick flurry, but she could see a path outlined before them with glowing crystal, extending out past the balcony like a bridge and swaying side to side in the wind. Serene walked with confidence, and Twilight followed, eyes widening as she realized the ridge was little more than bone lashed together with sinew and hide. She shook her head, focusing on her guide.
Where is the Shaper now?
Deep in the spire, holding back the dark. He had to shout to be heard over the wind. Perhaps you will descend as well and join the Savior in battle? Twilight hesitated, but Midnight didn't.
Perhaps. What are you doing?
Twilight shot her a sideways glare.
We shouldn't be making any promises until we know what he's talking about.
Midnight scoffed, reclining in the open air next to the bridge as if on an invisible cushion.
We shouldn't give a solid answer of any persuasion until we understand the question.
Twilight's tail flicked behind her, but she couldn't argue with the logic. For all they knew, saying no could provoke violence. For now, they would play it safe. The bridge led to another tower, but instead of ending at a door, it curved up and around, tracing the outer wall. It was sturdier here, anchored firmly to the crystal, and they passed 2 more bridges as they climbed. Whatever waited on the other side of each hidden by the snow. Serene walked slowly and without haste, and as the minutes piled on, Twilight allowed her mind to wander, playing with the scattered clues she had collected thus far. Princess Celestia had sent Cadence north looking for something, and obviously this had to be it. But where had it come from? Twilight knew her geography. There were no significant pony settlements north of Stalingrad. She knew that the Yaks built their villages in the mountains of the frozen north, but what she had seen under the ice was far, far more than a mere village, and it had had a railway built straight to it. She pursed her lips, brow furrowing in frustration. She had the puzzle outlined, but the most crucial pieces were missing. Equestria wouldn't build an expensive railroad to nothing, so she had to assume that the city had been here the whole time. But why wouldn't it be on any maps? Why had she never heard of these strange ponies whose bodies caught the light like living gemstones?
It wouldn't be the first grand secret Celestia kept from us. What of the nightmare? Darling, Celestia hid the truth from you even when you held it in your very hooves. She had a reason for that. I needed to make friends to defeat Nightmare Moon, and chasing after prophecies would not have done that.
Midnight let out a low chuckle.
I am impressed, little flower. I didn't expect you to accept that she lied to you so easily.
Twilight blinked. Had she just... She rolled her eyes, looking away from Midnight's grin.
Sometimes she had to lie to us, but she always had a good reason. It was only ever for our own good. Well, as we've taken one step, let us take the second.
Midnight slithered back into view, filling Twilight's vision with her slitted eyes.
Celestia lies. She knew this crystal city was here and hid it from all of Equestria. Why?
Twilight sighed.
The city must be dangerous somehow. It's the only explanation. But she sent Cadence here to try and find a solution to the corruption, so...
She nearly tripped. It was like the pieces of an optical illusion sliding into place, the puzzle pieces forming an outline that could only be recognized one way. Even if she didn't know what filled the gap, there was only one explanation for its nature.
The city must be the source. That thing you felt in the center!
Midnight nodded.
When we face it, we will have our answers.
If Twilight wasn't busy climbing a narrow path in the middle of a snowstorm, she would have jumped for joy. After everything she had been through, so many vague clues and dead ends, she was nearly there. But she had to be careful. As tempting as it might be to leave at that very instant, to teleport back under the ice and follow Midnight's senses to the source of the corruption, she couldn't risk failing now. Whatever was waiting for her in the core of the Crystal Spire, it had brought her entire world to its knees. The more she thought she understood, the more she had to remember to keep her guard up. If she failed now, it was likely the mystery of Equestria's destruction would never be solved. She was pulled from her thoughts by light ahead. Looking up, she saw shimmering rainbow light piercing the snow above her. And with a start, she realized that they had climbed all the way to the top of the tower. Serene stood nearly doubled over as he reached the peak and looked back to wait for her, his coat drawn tight around his shoulders and a hood raised over his ears. For the first time, Twilight realized that she should be cold. She took a deep breath and let it out, and shivered when she realized that she couldn't see her breath. She decided not to linger on the revelation. Next to fangs, bleeding reptilian eyes, and obligate carnivorism, cold acclimation was almost quaint. Instead, she quickened her pace, cresting the last few steps and meeting Serene's smile with her own. The top of the tower was open to the air, with a pointed roof held up by a circle of engraved crystal arches. A curtain of thick fur hung in each arch, weighed down by bone and stained with swirling patterns of color, and Serene pulled one open, ushering Twilight inside. Huge braziers burned within the curtains, the light soaking into the crystal and simmering in a smaller imitation of the grand hall Twilight had just come from. The floor was recessed into the tower, forming a sort of flat bowl shape, and in the center rose jagged spikes of inky black crystal that appeared to absorb light instead of reflecting it. It was difficult to focus on. Twilight's eyes seemed to slide off whenever she tried to get a better look. so she instead looked to the ponies seated around it. Although about a dozen ponies stood in silence along the edge of the room, the focus was clearly on the 3 elders arranged around the black crystal like the points of a triangle. Each sat in the center of a heart-shaped symbol, engraved into the floor and outlined with glittering silver, and each wore heavy fur robes adorned with colorful trinkets of stained bone and carved crystal. All 3 watched Twilight with their wizened gaze, showing little outward reaction. One, the only stallion in the group, turned to Twilight's guide.
"Who have you brought us, Serene Agate?"
Midnight stepped forwards, and Twilight moved with her. On this, they were in agreement.
My name is Twilight Sparkle,
She said.
I come from Equestria, and I'm chosen by the Shaper.
She hesitated only for a moment.
I think this is where I need to be.